The stretch of the Pacific Coast Highway that winds through Malibu is often romanticized in film and television as a sun-drenched corridor of freedom, a scenic route where the Pacific Ocean crashes against the rocks on one side and multimillion-dollar estates cling to the cliffs on the other. However, for those who travel it daily, the PCH is known for something far more sinister. It is a high-speed, narrow, and often treacherous road where the margin for error is razor-thin. On February 7, 2015, this iconic highway became the setting for a tragedy that would intersect the world of celebrity with the cold, hard reality of vehicular manslaughter. It was a clear, cool Saturday morning, the kind of day that usually invited leisurely drives along the coast, but for Bruce Jenner, it would become the most harrowing day of a life already defined by intense public scrutiny. Before the transition that would dominate global headlines later that year, Bruce was caught in a different kind of storm, a mechanical and logistical catastrophe that occurred in the blink of an eye but would take years to untangle in the courts of law and public opinion. The accident occurred near the intersection of PCH and Coral Canyon Road, a location notorious for its lack of a shoulder and its heavy weekend traffic. At approximately 12:12 p.m., a series of events began to unfold that would result in a multi-car pileup and the death of 69-year-old Kim Howe. Bruce Jenner was driving a black Cadillac Escalade, towing a trailer carrying an off-road vehicle. He was heading north, following a line of traffic that had slowed for a signal or a turning vehicle ahead. Ahead of him was a white Lexus, driven by Howe, and ahead of her was a Toyota Prius driven by Jessica Steindorf. According to initial reports and reconstructive physics, the Prius slowed or stopped, causing the Lexus to brake suddenly. Bruce, in the much heavier Escalade with the added momentum of a trailer, was unable to stop in time. The physics of the moment were unforgiving. The Escalade slammed into the back of the Lexus, propelled it into the oncoming southbound lanes, and set off a chain reaction that turned the serene coastal afternoon into a scene of twisted metal and shattered glass. The immediate aftermath of the crash was caught by a swarm of paparazzi, a constant and invasive presence in Bruce's life at the time. These photographers, who had been trailing the Olympic legend for miles in hopes of a money shot during his rumored transition, were the first to document the carnage. The images they captured were harrowing: the Escalade's front end crushed, the white Lexus decimated by a head-on collision with a Hummer in the southbound lane, and Bruce Jenner standing on the asphalt, his hands over his face in a gesture of absolute shock. In those first few minutes, the celebrity bubble was completely burst. There were no cameras for a reality show, no planned PR statements, and no glam squad. There was only a man standing on the side of a highway, looking at the wreckage of a life that had been snuffed out in a matter of seconds. The initial confusion at the scene was palpable, as first responders worked to extricate Kim Howe from her vehicle, unaware that she had already sustained fatal injuries. The public reaction was instantaneous and polarized. Because of Bruce's association with the Kardashian-Jenner media empire, the internet exploded with speculation. Was he distracted by his phone? Was he being chased by the paparazzi? Was he under the influence of any substances? The narrative began to shift almost immediately from a traffic accident to a character trial. For many, the accident was seen through the lens of celebrity privilege. The fact that an Olympic hero and a reality TV star was involved meant that the investigation would be under a microscope unlike any other traffic fatality in California history. Within hours, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department was on the scene, not just to clear the road, but to begin a forensic reconstruction of what had actually happened in those 5 seconds before impact. The investigation would eventually center on one crucial question: was this an unavoidable tragedy of timing, or was Bruce Jenner's driving unsafe for the conditions? As the sun set over Malibu that Saturday, the legal and social machinery began to turn. Bruce released a statement expressing his deepest sympathies to the family of Kim Howe, calling the accident a devastating tragedy. But for the Howe family and the other survivors of the crash, words were not enough. The investigation would soon reveal that Bruce had not been speeding in the traditional sense. He was traveling at or slightly below the posted speed limit. However, California law dictates that a driver must maintain a speed that is safe for conditions, accounting for traffic flow and the weight of the vehicle. By towing a heavy trailer on a congested highway, Bruce had increased his stopping distance significantly. The debate over whether he was distracted became a focal point of the media frenzy, with rumors circulating that he had been texting. While his phone records eventually cleared him of texting at the exact moment of impact, the broader question of inattentive driving remained a haunting specter over his reputation. The first part of this story is not just about the crash itself, but about the fragile nature of fame when it meets the finality of death. Kim Howe was a neighbor of the Kardashians in Calabasas, a woman who lived a quiet life and was simply out for a drive. Her death created a vacuum that could not be filled by celebrity apologies. For Bruce Jenner, the accident represented a terrifying intersection of his past and his future. He was at the height of his fame, yet he was about to undergo a transformation that would change the world's perception of him forever. The accident threatened to derail everything. This was the story the public thought they knew, but as the investigators dug deeper into the brake lines, the tire marks, and the paparazzi footage, it became clear that the fatal car accident was a complex web of mechanical failure, environmental hazards, and human error that would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. This collision was the catalyst for a legal battle that would span years and involve multiple lawsuits from the various drivers involved. It forced a conversation about the safety of the Pacific Coast Highway and the ethics of celebrity journalism. But at its core, Part 1 is the story of a 5-second window where physics took over and changed the lives of 3 families forever. It serves as a somber reminder that no amount of gold medals or television fame can protect a person from the raw, indifferent laws of motion. The Escalade, the Lexus, and the Prius were no longer symbols of status, they were debris on a highway, marking the spot where a legend's life took a turn into a dark and complicated legal wilderness. As the dust settled on the asphalt of the Pacific Coast Highway, the mechanical and scientific investigation began to take center stage, transforming a chaotic scene of metal and glass into a cold, calculated narrative of physics. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department did not treat this as a standard fender bender. The involvement of a global icon meant that every skid mark, every sensor reading, and every frame of paparazzi footage would be scrutinized by the finest forensic minds in the state. Investigators faced a primary challenge, determining the exact sequence of the 4-car pileup. While eyewitness testimony is notoriously fallible, with some claiming Kim Howe's Lexus hit the Prius first, the physical evidence told a more complex story. The black box data from Bruce Jenner's Cadillac Escalade was the silent witness the prosecution hoped would provide a smoking gun. It revealed that Jenner was traveling at approximately 38 miles per hour, slightly below the posted 45 miles per hour limit, but, crucially, he only began to apply the brakes roughly 1.5 to 2 seconds before the catastrophic impact. This 2-second window became the focal point of a 6-month investigation. In the eyes of the law, driving below the speed limit does not automatically grant immunity from negligence. California's basic speed law mandates that a driver must never travel faster than is safe for the prevailing conditions. On that Saturday, with heavy traffic and a massive trailer in tow, Jenner's stopping distance was compromised. The added weight of the off-road vehicle and trailer meant that even at 38 miles per hour, the Escalade possessed a terrifying amount of kinetic energy that the braking system, engaged too late, could not dissipate. Forensic experts reconstructed the scene to show that when Jenner's SUV slammed into the back of the Lexus, it didn't just push the car, it acted as a mechanical catapult. The force was so immense that it propelled Kim Howe's vehicle across the center line and directly into the path of a southbound Hummer H2. The head-on collision that followed was what ultimately claimed Howe's life, but the forensic consensus was clear: the chain reaction started with the Escalade. The investigation was further complicated by the presence of the very people who made Bruce Jenner's life a 24-hour reality show, the paparazzi. In a bizarre twist of fate, the photographers trailing Jenner for a scoop on his rumored transition inadvertently captured the most objective evidence available. TMZ and other outlets published high-resolution, frame-by-frame sequences of the crash that proved more reliable than any human memory. These photos showed the exact moment Jenner swerved to the right in a desperate, last-ditch effort to avoid the Lexus, an action that likely influenced the angle at which Howe's car was launched into oncoming traffic. Investigators cross-referenced these time-stamped photos with cell phone records to address the public's biggest question: was Bruce texting? While the records ultimately showed no outgoing or incoming data at the precise millisecond of the collision, the specter of distracted driving remained. Even if he wasn't looking at a screen, the delay in braking suggested his mind was elsewhere, perhaps on the very photographers whose lenses were pointed at him. By late 2015, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office faced a monumental decision that would ignite a firestorm of controversy. The Sheriff's Department had officially recommended a charge of misdemeanor vehicular manslaughter, believing there was sufficient evidence that Jenner's driving was unsafe for the conditions. However, the district attorney, Jackie Lacey, ultimately declined to file charges. The one-page declination sheet was a masterpiece of legal caution. It argued that because Jenner was under the speed limit and had attempted to brake, the prosecution could not prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that his conduct was unreasonable or rose to the level of ordinary negligence required for a criminal conviction. To the public, this felt like a celebrity get-out-of-jail-free card. The timing was particularly sensitive. The decision came just months after the Diane Sawyer interview and the Vanity Fair cover where Bruce transitioned to Caitlyn. Critics argued that the justice system was afraid to prosecute a trans icon during such a culturally significant moment, while supporters maintained that a tragic accident does not always equal a crime. While Jenner escaped the prison cell, the civil courtrooms were just beginning to roar to life. The legal battle shifted from the state of California to a multi-front war involving 3 separate lawsuits. The most significant was the wrongful death suit filed by Kim Howe's adult stepchildren, Dana Redmond and William Howe. They sought millions in damages, alleging that Jenner's reckless and wanton behavior had robbed them of their stepmother. Jenner's legal team, led by the formidable Blair Burke, fired back with a controversial motion to dismiss, arguing that the stepchildren had no standing to sue because they were financially independent adults who did not rely on Howe for support. This move was seen by many as cold and calculated, further souring the public's perception of the incident. Simultaneously, Jessica Steindorf, the driver of the Prius, and the Wolf-Millesi family, who were in the Hummer, filed their own suits for medical bills and emotional distress. The financial stakes were astronomical. Reports surfaced that Jenner's liability insurance was capped at a relatively modest $250,000 per person, a shockingly low amount for a man of his net worth. Without a substantial umbrella policy, Jenner's personal fortune, the houses, the cars, and the earnings from keeping up with the Kardashians, was suddenly at risk. The legal strategy became one of containment and quiet resolution. One by one, the cases began to settle behind closed doors. In December 2015, the suit with Jessica Steindorf was resolved for an undisclosed sum. By January 2016, a confidential settlement was reached with the Howe family, effectively ending the wrongful death claim before it could reach a jury. Finally, in 2018, a settlement of $800,000 was paid to the Wolf-Millesi family. Though Jenner remained a free woman, the quiet settlements cost her nearly $1 million in direct payments and likely millions more in legal fees, serving as a silent admission of the heavy price of a few seconds of inattention. While the legal machinery churned behind closed doors, the court of public opinion was already in full session, presided over by the 24-hour news cycle and the burgeoning power of social media. The timing of the Pacific Coast Highway accident was not merely tragic, it was culturally explosive. In early 2015, Bruce Jenner was the focal point of intense global speculation regarding his gender transition. Just months before the crash, his physical appearance had become the subject of tabloid scrutiny, and he was secretly preparing for a tell-all interview with Diane Sawyer that would change his life forever. When the news of the fatal collision broke, it didn't just compete with the transition story, it collided with it. Critics and commentators began to weave a narrative that suggested Jenner was escaping the consequences of the accident by leaning into his new identity as Caitlyn. This cynical viewpoint argued that the media's focus on his bravery during the transition served as a convenient PR shield, obscuring the reality that a 69-year-old woman had lost her life in a crash he had catalyzed. This collision of narratives created a unique brand of public vitriol. On one side were those who saw Jenner as a victim of the invasive paparazzi, photographers who, in their hunger for a transition scoop, may have created the high-pressure environment that led to the crash. On the other side were those who felt that Jenner was being protected by the Kardashian machine, a PR apparatus so powerful it could turn a vehicular manslaughter investigation into a footnote of a transition docuseries. The disparity between the treatment of Jenner and that of an average citizen was a frequent talking point. If an ordinary resident of Malibu had rear-ended a car and caused a fatality, would they have been released from the scene without an arrest? Would they have avoided charges so cleanly? These questions fueled a resentment that persists in some corners of the internet to this day, where "Caitlyn Jenner killed someone" remains a common refrain used to challenge her political and social stances. The legal strategy employed by Jenner's team only added fuel to this fire. When Jenner's attorneys filed a motion to dismiss the wrongful death lawsuit from Kim Howe's stepchildren, they didn't argue that Jenner was innocent of the crash. Instead, they argued that the stepchildren had no right to sue because they weren't financially dependent on Howe. Legally, This was a standard maneuver, but in the court of public opinion, it was a PR disaster. It painted a picture of a wealthy celebrity using cold, technical legalities to avoid paying for the loss of a human life. The stepchildren, Dana Redmond and William Howe, fought back in the media, describing their stepmother as a beloved figure whose love and affection could not be quantified by a bank statement. The juxtaposition was stark, a multi-millionaire Olympian fighting to prove a family didn't need their dead relative, while simultaneously preparing for a glamorous debut on the cover of Vanity Fair. The role of the paparazzi in this tragedy cannot be overstated. For years, Jenner had been the subject of a relentless hunt. On the day of the accident, he was being trailed by several vehicles full of photographers. While the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially stated that Jenner was not being chased in the legal sense, meaning he wasn't fleeing a crime, the psychological reality of being pursued by cameras while driving a heavy vehicle with a trailer is a form of pressure few people can imagine. This created a complex moral loop. The photographers were potentially a cause of the distraction, yet their images provided the very evidence that eventually cleared Jenner of criminal speed. It raised a haunting question about the cost of fame. At what point does the public's desire for celebrity gossip cross the line into public endangerment? The investigation eventually revealed a detail that few in the public acknowledged at the time. Jenner was not the only driver who made a mistake that day. The Toyota Prius at the front of the chain, driven by Jessica Steindorf, had slowed or stopped for unknown reasons, which set the entire tragedy in motion. Kim Howe's Lexus then struck the Prius before Jenner even reached the scene. Yet, because of his fame, Jenner became the face of the disaster. He was the rich celebrity in the big SUV, who crushed the innocent grandmother in the small sedan. This narrative was far more compelling for tabloids than a complex discussion about traffic flow and stopping distances on a highway with no shoulder. The case became a Rorschach test for how the public views the intersection of justice, celebrity, and gender identity. By the time Caitlyn Jenner made her public debut in the summer of 2015, the PCH accident was being rapidly moved into the past. Her docuseries, I Am Kate, focused on her new life, her advocacy, and her journey as a trans woman. Mention of the crash was minimal, treated more as a private grief she was carrying than a public controversy she was answering for. This pivot was remarkably successful from a branding perspective, but it left a lingering sense of unfinished business for those who followed the case closely. The civil settlements, while totaling nearly $1 million across the various parties, were paid out by insurance and personal funds in private, ensuring that the gruesome details of the impact never had to be relived in an open courtroom. The legal system eventually closed its books on the events of February 7, 2015. The ethical questions surrounding the case continued to ripple through the world of celebrity law and traffic safety. By 2018, when the final civil settlement was reached with the Wolf-Millesi family, who had been traveling in the southbound Hummer, the name Bruce Jenner had largely vanished from the cultural lexicon, replaced by Caitlyn. This rebranding of the person involved in the crash created a strange disconnect in the public consciousness. It was as if the accident had happened to a person who no longer existed, a psychological loophole that allowed the media and the public to move on far more quickly than they might have otherwise. Yet, for the survivors and the family of Kim Howe, the person behind the wheel remained the same, regardless of the name on the driver's license. The total financial toll of the accident, while never officially disclosed in one lump sum, can be estimated through the various filings and insurance caps. Between the settlements for the Howe family, Jessica Steindorf, and the $800,000 paid to the occupants of the Hummer, the monetary cost was significant, likely exceeding $2 million when including legal fees. However, in the realm of the Jenner-Kardashian fortune, this was a manageable expense, a cost of doing business on the public stage. This reality highlights the profound disparity in how the wealthy navigate tragedy. For an average family, a multi-million-dollar liability suit would mean total financial ruin and a lifetime of debt. For a celebrity of Jenner's stature, it was a crisis managed by top-tier attorneys and paid for by a combination of high-limit insurance and personal wealth. This economic insulation from tragedy is perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the story for those who believe that justice should be blind to a defendant's bank account. The accident also left a permanent mark on the Pacific Coast Highway itself. The stretch of road near Coral Canyon became a focal point for traffic safety advocates who argued that the PCH was dangerously outdated for the volume and speed of modern traffic. Following the crash, there were renewed calls for structural changes, wider shoulders, better signaling, and more stringent enforcement of speed limits in the Malibu corridor. In a way, the tragedy of Kim Howe's death became a data point in the ongoing battle to make one of America's most famous roads safer. However, for many, the safety of the road was secondary to the safety of the celebrity. The case remains a textbook example of how a high-profile individual can be the center of a fatal event and yet emerge with their freedom and career largely intact. It raised a mirror to the American justice system, asking whether the standard for negligence is moved when the person in the dock is an icon. Caitlyn Jenner's own reflection on the accident has been sparse but telling. In her memoir and subsequent interviews, she has consistently described it as a devastating tragedy and a horrible accident, but she has always stopped short of accepting the level of blame that the forensic evidence suggested. Her narrative remains one of being caught in an unavoidable chain reaction, a victim of circumstance rather than a driver who failed to maintain a safe distance. This posture is necessary for a public figure who must maintain a brand, but it leaves a void of accountability that many find difficult to reconcile. To this day, any public appearance or political statement made by Jenner is met with a barrage of social media comments referencing the crash. It is the unshakable ghost of her public life, a reminder that while the law may settle a case, the public rarely forgets a loss of life. The story you never heard is ultimately about the silence that follows the roar of a crash. It is about the quiet legal maneuvers that happen in luxury law offices while the public is distracted by the next big headline. It is about how the transition of a public figure became a shield, whether intentionally or not, against the full weight of public condemnation. Kim Howe was a woman who loved animals, her neighbors, and her quiet life in Calabasas. She became a footnote in the story of a celebrity's most difficult year. This imbalance is the true tragedy of the PCH accident. The legal resolution ensured that bills were paid and lawsuits were dropped, but it could never restore the balance of a life taken too soon. As we look back on the decade since the crash, the Bruce Jenner accident stands as a pivotal moment in the history of celebrity culture. It was the moment where the reality of reality television met the ultimate reality of death. It proved that the Kardashian Shield was not just about hiding scandals, but about navigating the most serious legal and moral challenges a human can face. Part 4 concludes not with a clear victory or a definitive defeat, but with a settled silence. The PCH continues to wind along the coast, the paparazzi continue to chase their targets, and the world continues to watch the Jenner family. But beneath the glamour and the headlines, there is a stretch of asphalt in Malibu that remains a monument to a 5-second window where everything changed, and where the story of a legend and the story of a tragedy became one and the same. The legacy of this event serves as a sobering lesson for the digital age. We live in a world where the narrative is often more powerful than the facts, and where fame can act as both a catalyst for disaster and a sanctuary from its consequences. The Bruce Jenner car accident was a fatal error, a forensic puzzle, and a PR masterpiece. But most of all, it was a human loss that reminds us that on the highway of life, no one is truly invincible, no matter how many gold medals they have won or how many millions are watching their every move.